Brutalism is an architectural movement that emerged in the 1950s by architects such as Erno Goldfinger and inspiration from Charles-Édouard Jarneret. Buildings made in the Brutalist style are often used with concrete and glass to create monochromatic and minimalistic designs. This specific style can be described as cold, dystopian, depressive, existential, yet oddly beautiful. I think that all of these adjectives that describe brutalism perfectly describe the low-budget indie film Stranger Than Paradise. But how does this film have anything to do with an architectural movement? What makes this film, or any film, brutalistic? Let's talk about it. Released in 1984, Stranger Than Paradise is a film separated into 3 acts: The New World, 1 Year Later, and Paradise. The film follows Willie, a gambling New Yorker from Hungarian roots who struggles with his American identity. In the first act, his cousin Eva travels from Budapest to Cleveland to live with her aunt, but finds herself stuck with Willie for 10 days while her aunt recovers in the hospital, much to the disappointment of Willie, who reluctantly welcomes her.
I really hate that kind of music.
It's Screaming Jay Hawkins and he's a wild man, so bug off.
During their stay, they pass the time together, slowly getting along, but Eva leaves for Cleveland before they can become friends. In the second act, Willie and his fellow gambling friend Eddie decide to embark on a road trip to Cleveland to visit Eva, where they explore the outskirts of the city together. In the third act, the 3 travel to Florida to escape the cold and grittiness that New York and Cleveland share. However, Willie and Eddie run out of luck when they lose all their money while betting on a horse race. After comedically and mistakenly receiving a large sum of money, Eva decides to leave Florida for Europe, but finds that the only flight available is to Budapest. After realizing that she left, Willie and Eddie head to the airport to stop her. When they get to the airport, Willie buys a ticket to board the plane in order to persuade Eva to stay in the United States with them.
Buy the ticket so I can get on the plane to take her off the plane.
The film ends with Willie not being able to get off the plane. Eddie looks at the departing airliner, believing that Eva and Willie are going to Budapest together, resulting in him driving back to New York. However, Eva never got on the plane, and returns to her empty motel room in Florida. Everyone accidentally goes their own way, and the film ends. Before I get into this portion of the video, I would like to make a disclaimer that most of what I'm about to say is pure speculation and interpretation, since nowhere in my research does anyone mention the word brutalism or its association with it. In my own interpretation, I believe that brutalism is more than just an architectural movement, but more general than that. I believe that brutalism is a genre that applies to any piece of art associated with the depressingly beautiful minimalistic ideas and visuals, and I think that Stranger Than Paradise excels at this in 3 ways: the minimalistic story, the monochromatic cinematography, and the depressingly beautiful production design, or lack thereof. Jim Jarmusch, the director of Stranger Than Paradise, wrote in his notes, "While shooting the film, someone outside of production asked me what kind of film we were making. I wanted to tell them it was a semi-new realist black comedy in the style of an imaginary Eastern European film director obsessed with Ozu and familiar with the 1950s American television show The Honeymooners. Instead, I mumbled something about it being a minimal story about Hungarian immigrants and their view of America. Neither answer is right. The story deviates from a cause and effect plot structure where one character has a goal and spends 2 hours trying to achieve it. Not a lot goes on other than our characters living their lives. We see them intermingle with each other, play cards, go to the movies, and other mundane everyday tasks that we perform.
Yeah, we're not doing anything.
The cinematography is probably the biggest comparison between brutalism and this film. A big noticeable stylistic decision of this film is that the fact that this film is only made up of 72 sequence shots, adding to the overall simplistic tone of the movie. The monochromatic pictures of the film contradict the comedic dialogue between the characters, but also amplifies the miserable settings in which they are placed in. Which leads us to the last comparison, the settings. New York, Cleveland, and Florida are all shot in the same way to radiate the same depressing feeling despite being wildly different from one another. Florida, meant to be a warm and fun paradise, doesn't bring any joy to our characters and has the same overall uneasy and dystopian tone as the other locations. We barely get to see any other characters other than Willie, Eva, or Eddie, creating a sort of liminal, surreal, and strange malaise for the duration of the film. This sense of liminality and limbo is also used by many critics who bash brutalistic architecture, calling it boring, which, surprise surprise, is a common criticism amongst this film. The conclusion of this video may be a bit of a stretch here, and once again, coming from my own interpretation of this film, but in the way I see it, Jim Jarmusch created a sort of subgenre of cinema, that being brutalism. Last year in November of 2020, I talked about the 1997 film Taste of Cherry and how many people put it under the description of minimalist cinema. Today, I want to put Stranger Than Paradise under the description of brutalist cinema. Monochromatic visuals, the minimalistic story, the dystopian-esque setting, the existential ideas that it proposes, all of it perfectly encapsulates brutalism and its core ideas. It takes the mundanity and simplicity of life and adds a slightly surreal and melancholic twist to it, the same way that architects in the 1950s did. And when you do that, you get something unique, you get something strange, you get something stranger than paradise.